On a sunlit afternoon in Montevalley, the Wingrove estate radiated peace. The air carried the scent of lemon blossoms, and the smooth surface of the estate's pond mirrored the rolling clouds like polished silver. Daphne Morrow, the renowned but reclusive former television icon, had opened her gates for one of her cherished Serenity Circle gatherings. It was a quiet tradition among the elite, her attempt at cultivating grace, gratitude, and whispered gossip over elderflower, tea, and hand-pressed biscuits. The atmosphere brimmed with cultivated calm until Henrik and Maribel of Winthorpe arrived. Their entrance was characteristically late, grand in that subtle, self-important way. Henrik, once Prince of Elderland and now comfortably detached from royal protocol, carried himself with the solemn stiffness of a man used to being obeyed but unsure why anymore. Maribel, his American wife turned duchess through ceremony and spectacle, drifted beside him with the effortless elegance of a woman who had learned to hide disdain behind oversized sunglasses and designer linen. They exchanged greetings with polite detachment, their presence commanding but never quite warm. As Daphne led them toward the central garden, a pair of ducks waddled into view. Ethel and Bertie, two well-fed mallards, who had become a sort of emotional staple on the estate. Daphne had often spoken of them as companions rather than pets. They had seen her through a bitter divorce, a spiritual reawakening, and 3 very public breakups with Hollywood wellness coaches. Henrik stiffened at the sight of them. He tried to smile but glanced quickly down at his polished loafers, as if the duck's proximity made him uncomfortable. Maribel leaned into his arm with the practiced intimacy of someone performing affection and muttered something under her breath. Though no one else appeared to notice, Daphne's subtle glance caught it. Her smile held, but her eyes briefly flickered sharp, discerning. As the guest sipped herbal concoctions and spoke of green juice retreats, Ethel quacked affectionately near the edge of the stone path. Henrik, distracted, stepped aside quickly, nearly kicking over a plate of fig-stuffed crackers. Maribel brushed off a speck of imagined duck down from her sleeve and tightened her jaw. She didn't try to mask her unease. The gathering pressed on, but an unspoken chill crept in. The Duchess shifted further away from the ducks, each movement elegant yet rehearsed. Henrik clasped his hands behind his back and started talking too. Much about solar panels, clearly trying to distract from the awkward tension now humming between host and guest. Meanwhile, Ethel waddled closer, drawn by Daphne's warm laugh and the scent of almonds. It was in this brief quiet before the wine replaced the tea, before the music rose and the crowd scattered, that the air turned still. The stage, though no one realized, had already been set. A peaceful afternoon was now primed for something unexpected, something feathered and unforgivable. The shift from peace to panic happened so quietly, so strangely, that many guests didn't even notice at first. One moment, Bertie and Ethel were circling lazily near the edge of the pond, pecking at the scattered seeds Daphne always kept in a hand-painted tin by the stone bench. The next, Ethel was gone, just gone, no splash, no warning, no flutter of wings to mark her exit. Only a small ripple on the water's surface and a few soft feathers left floating behind. Daphne turned, just in time to see Bertie paddling in tight, anxious circles, emitting a series of high-pitched, panicked quacks that broke the spell of conversation. Plates paused mid-air. Conversations trailed into stunned silence. A low breeze rustled the bamboo wind chimes overhead, but even that seemed somehow accusing. Something was wrong. Paulo, Daphne's longtime groundskeeper and unofficial pond guardian, came rushing from the patio where he'd been stacking chairs. His voice, usually calm, carried urgency now as he pointed toward the far edge. He claimed he had seen Henrik near the pond moments earlier, bending low, something metallic in his hand, a phone or maybe a flask, then a flash of movement near the water. No one else had witnessed it, but his expression was serious and oddly shaken. Daphne didn't press him then, but her thoughts narrowed quickly toward her guests. Henrik, oblivious to the growing concern, stood by the koi fountain discussing the carbon neutrality of electric yachts. His laugh was too loud, his gesturing too wide, as though trying to steer attention as far from the pond as possible. Meanwhile, Maribel had retreated to a shaded table, delicately lifting a wineglass to her lips while subtly tucking her crocodile skin clutch beneath her chair. She didn't look toward the pond. Not even once. Daphne approached the water's edge, scanning the ripples for any sign of Ethel. Bertie was still there, now pressed against the lily pads, letting out low, distressed murmurs that broke Daphne's heart more than she expected. She crouched slowly, whispering softly, not to the duck, but to herself. Then she rose with an unsettling calm and turned back toward the gathering. The mood had changed. Guests spoke in hushed tones, heads turning subtly in Henrik and Maribel's direction. Someone checked their phone and noticed Daphne's cryptic Instagram story posted just minutes after the disappearance. A photo of Bertie alone on the pond, framed in overcast light, with a caption that didn't name names but said more than enough. Henrik finally noticed the shift. He frowned, then asked if the music could be turned back up. No one moved. No one answered. Maribel stood slowly, clutch in hand, eyes avoiding Daphne's. The air had grown thick with discomfort and something else accusation. By the time they left, early and without fanfare, the damage was already done. A duck was missing. A host was hurt. And a story, however strange, however small, was already beginning to take shape among the hedges and stone paths of Wingrove Estate. The days that followed were marked not by denial, but by a silence so deliberate it became its own kind of confession. Henrik remained within the gates of the Winthorpe villa, rarely venturing beyond the stone drive. He took to pacing, circling the garden with the kind of nervous energy he used to reserve for press junkets and family summits. Maribel, on the other hand, moved like nothing had happened. She went about her scheduled Pilates at 9, matcha at 10, phone calls with brand reps at 11, as though ducks had never existed, as though Serenity Circles and vanishing waterfowl were irrelevant to her curated world. But the world outside, their walls hadn't forgotten. The local Montevalley news site published a vague but pointed column about the disturbing loss of beloved wildlife during an elite gathering. No names were mentioned, but the imagery was clear. A once peaceful garden, a missing mallard, a noble guest with a stick. The headline read, "Who silences the pond?" Daphne, without ever saying the word Winthorpe, fueled the speculation with a quiet media campaign of her own. She appeared on Ophelia Winstead's new wellness webcast, Bare Roots, looking composed but unmistakably haunted. The lighting was soft. The candles behind her flickered like a seance had just ended, and her tone suggested heartbreak without theatrics. She described the event as a violation, not just of a social contract but of sacred trust between host and guest, between human and nature. Ophelia, always the master of the slow lean, tilted forward and placed her hand dramatically on the table. She asked if the incident involved anyone titled. Daphne paused, then nodded, not to confirm, but to allow the silence to do it for her. The internet didn't need much more. Within minutes, clips of the interview were stitched, edited, and broadcast across every social media platform. Twitter christened the scandal #Duckgate. TikTokers reenacted scenes with rubber duck props and plastic tiaras. Instagram flooded with memes of Henrik Photoshop chasing birds with an umbrella. Henrik, desperate to stop the bleeding, issued a clunky, impersonal statement through their joint press liaison. The message insisted that no harm had come to any ducks, that the Duke and Duchess of Winthorpe deeply respected the natural world, and that accusations were unfounded, theatrical, and damaging. But it was too late. The damage had already mutated into cultural comedy. Critics and columnists dug deeper, unearthing past moments where Henrik had spoken dismissively about wildlife, once referring to ducks as flapping pond vermin during an overheard conversation at a charity brunch. Maribel, in a now resurfaced lifestyle interview, had confessed she found birds unpredictable and unsettling. What once passed as trivial eccentricity now formed part of an incriminating pattern. As the heat intensified, the Montevalley Wildlife Protection Council announced that Ethel had been registered as part of a protected pair under the estate's Garden Sanctuary Clause. While no criminal charges were filed, a formal citation was issued. Henrik and Maribel were fined $600 for disturbing and potentially endangering protected wildlife. It was a minor infraction, but the symbolism roared louder than the fee. Henrik refused to appear publicly for days afterward. He remained in his study, reading articles about aquatic birds and animal empathy, as though knowledge might redeem him. Maribel grew increasingly annoyed. She told a friend over speakerphone that Montevalley had turned into a province of poultry sympathizers and hinted they might relocate, but they didn't leave. They stayed, watched, whispered about, and increasingly isolated. And as each evening settled over Wingrove Pond, with only Birdie gliding across the surface in lonely figure eights, the story grew not smaller, but stranger. What began as silence had become spectacle. What started as gossip now festered as folklore. And Henrik, for all his former status, could not seem to outpace the ghost of a missing duck. Months had passed, yet the shadow of the pond lingered over Henrik and Maribel like a long, unwelcome guest. The fine had been paid quickly, without protest, but no amount of money could scrub the memory of Ethel's vanishing or the public suspicion that followed. At first, they tried to pretend it was all behind them. Henrik returned to his daily walks through the courtyard, arms crossed behind his back, head bowed as though deep in thought, though his gaze always darted toward the news vans that still occasionally appeared at the estate gates. Maribel took a different route. She doubled down on her lifestyle ambitions, launching a new wellness line called Unruffled, pitched as a sanctuary of serenity for the misunderstood. Her launch event was hosted at a boutique hotel rooftop in Los Angeles, complete with duck-shaped macarons and silk robes adorned with feathers, not real, she insisted, just embroidered. But the crowd barely looked up from their phones. The press coverage focused not on the brand but on her evasive smile and the protesters, stationed outside holding signs with cartoon mallards wearing halos. Meanwhile, Henrik, increasingly restless, began a podcast titled Feathered Truths. He spoke in slow, self-serious tones about the ethics of wildlife preservation and the dangers of viral misinformation. He invited experts, though most declined, and rambled through solo episodes with titles like Misunderstood Majesty, A Duke's Lament, and Flight, Freedom, and Forgiveness. Reviews were unkind. One listener wrote that the only thing missing from the show was the duck itself. Daphne, ever tactful, remained silent in public but continued to tend to Wingrove as though it were a living, breathing friend. Birdie still circled the pond each morning, quieter now, slower in his movements. Guests who returned to Serenity Circle noticed the absence immediately. They whispered condolences as though mourning a person. Daphne nodded gently, accepting their sorrow without adding to it. On rare occasions, she would pause near the water and murmur that forgiveness, like feathers, must be earned, not taken. In town, things shifted subtly. The Winthorpes no longer received invitations to gallery previews or charity galas. A cafe that once named their seasonal scone after Maribel quietly renamed it the Mallard Crumble. Children on bicycles sometimes paused outside their gate and imitated duck sounds. One boy shouted, "Where's Ethel?" before speeding off, leaving Henrik frozen in the doorway with a gardening glove in one hand and a watering can in the other. Late one evening, Henrik sat alone on the veranda, watching dusk fall over the hills. Maribel had gone to bed early, exhausted by her latest PR strategy meeting. He listened to the stillness, the way it settled like dust across the estate. Then he stood, walked to the edge of their own neglected pond, a shallow, man-made thing with more algae than elegance, and stared into the dark water. He imagined the ripple of wings, the soft paddling of two birds side by side, unbothered by scandal or spectacle. And for a moment, a strange pang of regret tightened his chest, not for what had been done, but for how little he had cared when it happened. Behind him, the house stood silent. Before him, the pond waited, unchanged and empty. And as the sky dimmed to charcoal, Henrik turned away, not in guilt or humility, but in quiet, reluctant acceptance. The world would remember. The duck would not return. And in the wake of everything that had unfolded, that above all else was the one thing he could never undo.